everyone, this is Sofia Smallstorm, and I'm on an interview blitz right now. I'm actually very excited. There's so much to do interviews and podcasts on, and I know so many great people who can come back repeatedly because they always have wonderful things to say. And I have one of these people with me today, Joe Atwill, also known as Joseph Atwill, the creator of the very controversial Caesar's Messiah. And also he's done some pieces that are on the Gnostic Media website. Let him tell us about them. So Joe, welcome.
Well, it's good to be here, Sophia. How are you?
I'm fine. We've talked a lot, and we've planned this show a few times, and it's been canceled due to construction at our respective domiciles.
Right.
So hopefully we're clear today. So, Joe, today we were going to talk about the weaponization of biology for control and alteration of the human species. But maybe you would like to tell people about some of the things you put up on your various websites so that they know where we're going to go with this.
Sure. I think that the foundation for me, for the research I do in this area, comes from two places. One is the evidence that the counterculture, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that were given to teenagers as a kind of positive direction in the late 60s was actually created by elements inside the United States government, and it was done for the purpose of debasement, rendering the victims easier to control. And I know that this idea seems far-fetched to people, particularly if they've never heard it before, but if they go to, for example, postflaviana.org, that weird name website that I run with Jerry Russell, they can see actual evidence. There's articles there, Manufacturing the Deadhead, and there's an article on Gregory Bateson, and there's a couple articles sort of decoding Catcher in the Rye, Salinger's notorious book, all of them showing that actual evidence that the government has been wanting, or elements inside the government, controlling elements inside our government, have wanted to debase certain fractions of the population. On one level, it kind of creates a genetically stratified society with epsilons, deltas, betas, and alphas. But moreover, it's just a way of genocide. They just want to get rid of a lot of people. And so these areas have, led me into concern about toxicity as part of the project.
Can I pause you for a minute?
Yeah.
When you say evidence, that there's evidence in these articles, can you tell me what that really means?
Sure.
Evidence?
The evidence, the physical evidence would be the pay requisition for Gordon Wasson, who was the one who created the story which began the psychedelic revolution in the United States. If you trace how psychedelics became part of our culture, they would start with a story that occurred in May 1957, and it was concerning Gordon Wasson's trip to Mexico, where he uncovered the psilocybin mushroom and claimed to have had a spiritual experience with it. This received a glorious press coverage by Life magazine. And in fact, the project was part of what's called MK Ultra, the branch of the CIA that was developing mental control over the populations. So this is just a very direct piece of evidence. The fact that this project, and incidentally, the Wasson's trip actually had a designation, Subproject 58 within MK Ultra nomenclature. So we're not talking about some conjecture here. This was a project. This project was clearly, done to introduce psychedelic drugs, and I showed that just more evidence. I won't bother to go into at this point because I'm going to go on to another branch of evidence. But it's clear enough so that someone who wants to, hopefully everyone will read these articles and they'll see for themselves what we're talking about. And then beyond that, using the same principle, the Freedom of Information Act, another letter was obtained, and this was from Gregory Bateson, the famous anthropologist. In fact, he was the founder of the CIA, or one of the primary founders of the CIA. And in an article written by Dr. David Price, who had become concerned about the actual purpose of Bateson's research, he described it as weaponized anthropology, and he showed a letter that Bateson had written which actually described experiments in terms of how a superior population could control the inferior population. Actual experiments. Bateson references them. And that this was being given by Bateson as a good idea, something that the OSS, which becomes the CIA later on, should use in terms of controlling what Bateson was referring to in the letter were the Indonesian populations. So there was actual science or weaponized anthropology that was in play and being used by the United States government against civilian populations. And so I show that these two points of evidence are actually related because you then go forward from Bateson to Wasson. Again, this is inside the context of the CIA. To the psychedelic revolution, and then you intersect Dave McGowan's work, where he shows that basically all of the original rock idols that came out of Laurel Canyon in the late 60s were children of people inside military intelligence. And Dave shows that this couldn't be circumstantial, that this was, in fact, obviously a project. And then in my article, Manufacturing the Deadhead, I wrote with Jan Irwin, I show that the same thing occurred in San Francisco, where if you deconstruct the band The Grateful Dead, you come up with nothing but CIA employees and members of Bohemian Grove. So in total, I think the picture is just very clear, and the evidence is simply overwhelming that the counterculture was an attempt to debase the populations. It would make them easier to control. In other words, you would be following the anthropology that Bateson laid out, which he referred to as a native revival or archaic revival. In other words, it would make the population want to embrace their past. And this is why, incidentally, when you look at the original rock idols that come out of Laurel Canyon, people like David Crosby, you'll see that they're always dressed in archaic outfits. You know, Crosby would wear buckskin fringe and a coonskin cap and had a beard and looked like a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Well, where does this method of dress come from? It comes directly from Bateson. He's creating people who are identifiable, in other words, people who have cultural influence, who are taking the culture backwards, taking them to an archaic place for a number of reasons, but always with the idea of making them easier to control. So
now, I'm going to just stop you for a minute again, if that's okay.
Sure.
So this is all very interesting, this idea that these native revivals, embracing our past, celebrating, you could say, more primitive styles of living and being, that actually, I guess, regresses us culturally. Is that fair to say?
yes.
And you know, Joe, there have been many things in fashion. We are going to talk about biology. You have spoken of weaponized anthropology. We're going to be talking about weaponized biology. But I just want to mention that this fashion trend of wearing, for men to wear shorts that were very baggy and very long and showed their underwear, I read somewhere that this was to dress adult men like toddlers. And that would be a sort of regressive move on the part of whoever dictates fashion. But we are being infantilized at the same time as we're being, biologically stunted and culturally, made into chaos. So I want to point out that the infantilization is part of it too.
Right, and that's right. And you can sort of see this influence even in the Beatles, where their original haircuts were sort of like those that children would wear. Obviously, you're going, as they always do, move incrementally to move culture in a direction. You're going to end up with, very primitive looking hairstyles. But, all of these elements, to make us like children, to make us embrace very, very simplistic and dumbed down philosophies, all of it takes us away from the ability to reason. The whole culture sort of works to make us mental slaves. And the opposite of the mental slave would be someone who has a lot of power in logic and mental energy and skepticism. And so this was the threat that the oligarch was addressing with the counterculture, is that basically they just wanted to take, the entire culture, all of the teenagers, into to ratchet them down intellectually and emotionally, and thereby make them much easier to control and less of a threat. They wouldn't be trying to develop their own power. They'd be living on communes and smoking marijuana, and thereby not being any sort of a potential threat to the oligarchs.
Yeah, so the drugs would create an altered state of mind. And then I think also that this removing the power to reason brings with it removing the ability to discern. And discernment is something that protects us in our lives, the development of our own personal ways of discerning what's good and bad for us, and, what we need to do, what we would like to do, all that, and making people follow these trends in these mass hysterical, like Woodstock, for instance. And then in general, the mass rush to wear bell bottoms and grow your hair. And even in our day and age, tattoos is one that I can think of, piercings. All this is something that I think is definitely engineered, but makes people believe that it's better to go along with and be part of what everyone else is doing. That way you're cool, and not to make your own decision to be how you want to be, Right.
And the citizen just needs to be aware that there are destructive, weaponized anthropologic forces all around him or her. One of them, you mentioned tattoos, which I couldn't agree more, and piercing, I couldn't agree more. I'll also point to the television shows which basically glorify a non-electric society. If you look at all of what's called survivor shows, they all basically glorify people who are living in, pre-industrial revolution conditions. In fact, they've even taken it beyond that. They've taken it to a level of primitiveness in some of the more recent shows where, they have one called Naked and Afraid, where they take a man and a woman who don't know each other, make them naked, they have no clothes, and then put them in a jungle with no resources so that they have to basically try to survive just with what they can, produce with their hands. And then they, conclude the show with, what a meaningful and wonderful experience it is that people talk about what they've learned and all this. But the vast number of these shows, which have suddenly appeared and are just everywhere now, is a cultural force that is weaponized anthropology that's just preparing the populations for a post-electric society. I think when you get into the stratification that they have in mind, there'll be the large fraction of the populations will be in a post-electric world. And so these survivor shows are just preparing them And another force would be the zombie shows. If you look at all of the dozens of zombie shows, they're so epidemic that they don't even use the word zombie. They just say like Z Nation or, they use the letter Z because zombies are now it's just everyone knows about zombies. Well, why do they do this? What is the purpose of having, hundreds of these zombie shows? Well, it's because a zombie is a kind of human being that can be slaughtered with extreme malevolence. They're not really human, and therefore you can, as in one show that I was told about, you can take their brains out with an egg beater. And if this was, of course, a normal human, quotes, you couldn't, even in our current debased television world, you couldn't do things like this. But because they're a zombie, it's fine, and even children watch these shows. And my point is that what they're really doing is they're just explaining or conditioning people to know how to act in the crisis. When you have the basically a situation where the normal systems of resource in our society have shut down, people will know how to act toward individuals who are hungry or sick. I mean, they'll simply kill them. So basically, the zombies are just showing how to relate to one another, when we get to this place that they want to take us.
So the zombies are in these shows will be the equivalent of the future hungry and sick people?
Yes, exactly. That's how they're being set up. I mean, basically they're just showing your neighbors how to treat you when you come feeling hunger and sickness and ask for help. So that's really what the purpose of the zombie shows is. It's a kind of neuro-linguistic programming. If you go to the website I mentioned, postflaviana.org, and you look at Pedophile in the Rye, which is a decoding of a method that J.D. Salinger used to program the subconscious. It's well known. The science was being developed by MK Ultra and the CIA at the time Salinger was, producing his book. But in the article, we show really clear and I would say basically overwhelming evidence that the Salinger knew how to, and was trying to program the subconscious of his readers to experience sexual debasement. He was basically trying to encourage pedophilia as a sexual activity. And so, and then as another example, on the Gordon Wasson Life magazine article, which was on the cover, it's described in a black box, which is inset into the cover, and the first part of the black box talks about Wasson's glorious experience with drugs in the Mexican desert. But there is another article that's described in this box, and it's described, the three words are teenage allowances, right? So once you understand that the first part of the box describes an MK Ultra project, then, one and one can be put together, and you can see that the words teenage allowances are not random or circumstance. That would be just unimaginable. That this is an example of neuro-linguistic programming, that they are basically softening the minds of the individuals who are reading the article, that in the future teenagers will be allowed to take these drugs. And bear in mind, you're very close to 10 years later that you have Woodstock with Life magazine covering, in a glorious way. In fact, it's actually making a kind of representation that Woodstock was almost like a new religion that was being, developed by these people who had spontaneously decided that society was wrong and the way it was going, and that they wanted to go into this archaic path. So, when you start looking when you start understanding this, use of the media to program the subconscious, then it makes a lot more sense, for one thing. Then you don't have any confusion as to, well, why are there so many zombie shows? I mean, it just seems preposterous, right? I mean, it's not something that people normally go out of their way to experience. And why are there all these survivor shows? How did they become so popular? Well, it makes no sense in a normal world, but if you think of the idea of neuro-linguistic programming, then yes, it makes a whole lot of sense, and it's very easy to understand.
Well, I had been told that the reason they switched over to survivor shows was that the television programmers, that's what they are, decided that it was cheaper to have those shows than to, have sets and stages and actors and all of that kind of stuff. And I actually bought that for a while. Now, this Naked and Afraid, by the way, I just want people to know, I've seen it a couple of times, but it's extremely boring and sappy, and it's not at all creative in any way. I mean, these people hardly do anything, but their private parts are all blurred out. So
yeah, but I mean, so when you think about the show, they have the idea that reality shows, so-called, were less expensive than sitcoms, but in fact, that's not relevant to the question of whether or not the oligarchs are using the shows as a means to condition the minds of the population. And I think as you said, when you look at a show like Naked and Afraid, and you think about, well, it's really quite boring. All you really have is naked people as anything that's interesting. Typically they're just sick. In the ones that I've watched, they're physically ill, and you just watch them suffer. I mean, why would the show even be considered? But it makes perfect sense as part of this preparation for a post-apocalyptic society. And I think that that's basically what we're dealing with. I think that if you look at the concept of the apocalypse, it's actually a goal. And this would be sort of a dividing line between the New World Order and the Old Order. And they have in mind an actual sort of end to this civilization, which as I would envision it, be extremely violent with billions of fatalities, but at the end of it, they envision themselves in complete control over the world. And so, this, I think, is, what you experience when you enter into America's media. You're being subjected to neuro-linguistic programming that's debasing your intellect so that you'll make the wrong decisions when the crisis occurs.
Well, I sent you this article this morning that I got from Harper's Magazine titled, "Come With Us If You Want to Live, Among the Apocalyptic Libertarians of Silicon Valley." And in my brief comments on the email, I said these are the unsexy futurists. And, compared to the Kardashians and Bruce, as I call him, Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner, they are the ones who are pushing the sex typology of the future, which will be a pan-sex and blended sex and no reproduction. And that's all being done through amazingly slick television programming. The Kardashians are fully, they're cosmetically altered, all of them, even the girls, the family members. Of Bruce Jenner, you could say, his adopted or his step-family. For instance, they've had, apparently I found out by digging a bit, they've all had butt implants. They have giant rear ends. I call this the Brontosaurus rear. And these are not real implants. And I think this type of surgery is going to be heavily popularized in the years to come. This is a liposuction, a removal of abdominal fat, which is then transferred to the buttocks. And I was thinking about this the other day. I just want to mention it because it's a very interesting little sideline. you develop your maximal number of fat cells by the time you're age 6 or so. So if you go from a normal size 6-year-old to a 300-pound adult, you're not going to have more fat cells. You're going to have bigger fat cells. So effectively, when your abdominal fat is removed and put on your buttocks, if you should ever gain weight, you will not have a big belly. You'll just have bigger and bigger buttocks. And this is going to be another way to popularize a different body type, not so much the Nordic, lean Nordic European type that we see in America. We're going to see a much more, hip-heavy, multicultural body. And so the Kardashians are out there to do that, and also to popularize the idea of, polysurgical sex alteration and improvement, as they call it. But at the same time, there is this group that is, I call it the Google Geeks, who are in Silicon Valley, and they have labeled themselves the New Enlightenment, the rationalists. And they are going to save us, because the rest of us are not smart enough to battle what they call the AI, artificial intelligence explosion, which will take place imminently. And that is when AI overtakes human intelligence and goes wild and is hostile. So where they are stating that there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a hostile AI that escapes into the wild, an unfriendly AI, meaning unfriendly and indifferent to human values and ethics and goals.
Right. I know that that's what they claim, and it is a theoretical possibility. However, I would say with almost virtual certainty that why they're presenting this idea is that they are simply artificially creating a crisis that there will be political control created to deal with. The whole thing is just fake and ridiculous. I think that there are probably, because it is kind of a movement, and there is some sort of intellectual concept aspect to this program that is sort of intriguing. The idea of what is intelligence and how can natural humans survive. I mean, these are ideas that are interesting, and in fact, there are some concerns, particularly far into the future. But at the moment, what I think is that these are just, neuro-linguistic programming elements that are being used to get us to accept, a greater degree of control over our minds by government. I mean, the first thing you have to do is expose the society that controls government and that has basically taken culture to this place. Because until you do that, you really have no idea what you're going to be dealing with when you have groups like this movement that's coming out of Silicon Valley. I mean, how does the government plug into this? How does the government control it? It's sort of like when you look at Bruce Jenner, and if you let the conversation go into the idea of or the discussion of, well, why shouldn't people be able to choose the sexuality they're most comfortable with? If that becomes the basis of the argument, then you've already lost. This is how society gets destroyed, is by the creation of these artificial arguments, which then keep the real thinking from occurring, the thinking that should be happening. The question we should ask about Bruce Jenner and about the whole gender bending phenomena is it a weapon? Is it something that's being created artificially to basically take society into a place that the oligarchs want it to be because they want to have a tighter slavery over us, you see? This is the first question. This is the question you have to answer. And this is the same question you have to bring to the artificial intelligence the anti-artificial intelligence movement that's coming out of Silicon Valley is, well, who's doing it? Why? What is, is there the possibility of it being a weapon that is used just to create another excuse for there to be different kinds of surveillance and different kinds of freedoms that are sacrificed? And you have a lot of Google people involved with this. Look at the trajectory of Google, look at its the connection between it and the government, and it just doesn't smell right, particularly in light of understanding that there is a society inside of government. Once that line is crossed, and that's why I really hope people do go to the website I mentioned and actually look at those foundation articles, because they really show the existence of a society, a real society that is nefarious, that has malevolent intent, and is in control of our government. And so once you have that bit of information, then you have, I think, the clear-mindedness to be able to evaluate all of these other things properly, and and hopefully defend yourself against them, and defend yourself against the sophistry that is used by the people who develop these movements, so that you don't succumb to them, and keep your skepticism and your balance and your reasoning, even though you're getting, like a Google executives telling you that we have to be very, very afraid of artificial intelligence escaping into the wild. I mean, I'll tell you the truth. I'm a lot more afraid of a secret society inside of government than I am of AI running wild in my neighborhood.
Well, honestly, I think that I'm laughing here, trying not to be heard. I think that expression "into the wild" just means getting out of our control. But, Joe, the point of this gender bending is, number one, to start blurring family roles based on gender and the functionality of each gender in reproduction, because the more you blend the genders, you're going to end up with something that can't reproduce because it's not male, not female. So effectively, it's like the mule that you create from crossbreeding the horse and the donkey. Mules are sterile. You can make mules, but you always have to use a horse or a donkey. And a donkey. And so I think that eventually, with enough of this gender blurring going on, more and more people will not be able to conceive, whether they want to or not. May I ask a question? Is that the background construction noise that we're hearing?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay, because it's coming across as like huge static spurts, and it's audible. It's going to be audible in the recording, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Let me go and see if I'm going to try to see if I can close some windows, perhaps, make it better.
Okay, well, I'll just talk and hope that you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yeah. So we're not going to be able to reproduce, and therefore the reproduction rate will drop drastically. The numbers of new humans will fall rapidly, and there will have to be state-assisted labs, laboratory facilitated reproduction, because we're not going to be able to do it at home. So that will put the creation of new population in the hands of this, what you call the government, and then of course the hidden society, the, society with ugly intentions toward humanity that's within the government. But I find it interesting that you are suggesting that this AI explosion is something that is planted in the minds of the Google geeks to keep them busy in a way. These kids are honestly, they're kids. They're being pulled out of college with bribes, what I'm calling it bribes, of $100,000 or more, and their mentors are people like Peter Thiel, who started PayPal, Ray Kurzweil, and they're being asked to create AI startups. So they have these organizations some of these companies are called, you know, the Singularity Institute is, of course, Ray Kurzweil's. Now it's called the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, MIRI. And then you have these kids starting things like, I'm looking for the names here. They have sleep projects called Everyman 3, where they sleep every few hours, so they're able to work over 100 hours a week on world optimization. And they start all their own companies. They're freaked out about what's going to happen to humanity. And they do believe that only a few people have the brains. They all have average IQ of, 140 or so. Only a few people have the brains to figure out what to do for the world to save it from several different possibilities. They believe that in descending order, the world may be taken out by bioengineered pandemic, environmental collapse, unfriendly AI, that's actually number 3 on the list, nuclear war, natural pandemic, economic political collapse, asteroid, and then the last one on the list is nanotech gray goo. So these guys are seeking ways to avert destruction by all these possibilities. And they consider themselves, only themselves, to be equipped with the intelligence and the resources to figure out what to do. Hence, they're the rationalists for the future.
Right. This reminds me of the famous interview that Huxley gave to Mike Wallace. Oh, gee, it was in the early 60s, I believe. It's on YouTube. And all he talked about was how frightened he was about the possibility that the government might be developing drugs which could be used against democracy, that the government would be able to create drugs that would basically be able to shape the minds of the population. And this was during the time when Huxley was developing these drugs and these techniques. So the concept that I would like to introduce is that of the lifetime actor. And this is a really valuable concept. You can demonstrate people like Gregory Bateson, Gordon Wasson, and Aldous Huxley were lifetime actors. Everything that they represented was fake. They were creating a persona that was a kind of plausible deniability to what they were doing. In other words, Huxley claimed he was afraid that the government would develop these techniques, and this then protected him against being exposed as the person who was developing them. So now you have this situation where obviously there's a tremendous amount of advancement by the government in terms of the ability to monitor the population, right? We've got the snooping of our government is basically being legalized and being technologicized, where you're just getting all sorts of fancy government snooping devices. Now, at the same time, you have this supposed spontaneous movement coming out of Silicon Valley, which is going to save us, from some of these excesses. Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy it, and I would think that citizens would be really well advised to be very skeptical about this movement. And there should be some scrutiny of these individuals by media that is skeptical, because all they get is reviews or puff pieces like the one you sent me, which basically has as an assumption that they're well-intentioned. They may be wrong, and there's this possibility that they're that who knows what's going to happen, but that they are well-intentioned. Well, I would like to see some media come forward and ask questions about their intentions, and have as a question as to whether or not they are really benign, and to try to get them to and also to do some investigative reporting. to try to see, well, what are the connections between these people and the government? And what I'm afraid of is that you're going to find, if you start digging a little bit, is that rather than actually defending us against these threats, they are the ones who are creating it.
Right. You know, it's funny because I want to read a little quote here. It parallels exactly or reflects exactly what you just talked about. So this is from the article, which I think I'm going to post a PDF of along with this interview, if you don't mind, Joe.
No.
On October 1, 2013, Republicans in Congress shut down the government. The venture capitalist Chamath Palihapitiya, that's an Indian name, I think, made news for crowing about how great the stagnation was for Silicon Valley. Quote, "It's becoming excruciatingly obviously clear to everyone else that where value is created is no longer in New York, it's no longer in Washington, it's no longer in LA," he said. "It's in San Francisco and the Bay Area. Companies are transcending power now. We are becoming the eminent vehicles for change and influence in capital structures that matter. If companies shut down, the stock market would collapse. If the government shuts down, nothing happens and we all move on because it just doesn't matter."
Well, I mean, he's probably right in one sense. The problem that I have is the possibility that the power of government is just moving into these corporations.
Exactly. He's making a distinction between them and the government and poo-pooing the importance of the government when it's very possible that this crowd, this clan is the government.
Yeah, exactly. And you see, the government is supposed to be a reflection of the democratic process. It isn't, but it's supposed to be. Whereas with the corporations, there isn't even this veneer. They don't have to even worry about maintaining the pretense of being influenced by democracy. So when the power is being shifted over to corporations, this just isn't good for the citizen, and it isn't something that the citizen agreed to have occur. We never agreed to have our democratic processes submerged in the power of corporations. And so we'd be well advised to demand that this process stop and that there be some sunlight put on, well, who are these people? Because, you know, if you look in, just a really good example is just look at Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove. You know, get a list of the people who are members of these societies, these secret societies, to which have secret oaths. And you can see that they represent virtually all of the corporate power. It's all right there inside these societies. And then, decisions are made inside the societies which influence culture but are outside of the process of democracy. And this isn't something that the citizen should put up with. The best example of this was the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb was a decision of the Bohemian Grove. I mean, this isn't even something that's controversial. This is known. They brought in all of the heads of industry who are all either high-level Freemasons or members of Bohemian Grove, outlined how the project would be structured, who would do what, and then use the influence they had over government to actually then fund the project. But it was a decision of the Bohemian Grove. Now, if you think about the atomic weapon, the cover story, they said, well, we had to develop it because we were afraid the Germans were going to get it, right? Well, I don't know if this was really why they developed it, because the idea that developing the atomic bomb would make us safer just seems preposterous. And in fact, 10 years after they decided to create the atomic bomb, suddenly you had school children being told to duck and cover. Remember that program in the 50s in the United States, where the atomic bomb was going to be let off and we needed to duck and cover, and everyone was terrorized. And so basically you had a terror weapon, a weapon that would just terrorize the population, created by the Bohemian Grove. This just isn't good democracy. If the democratic process had been involved, we would have never created the atomic weapon, because it would have been self-evident that, hey, wait a second, if we do it, other people are going to do it too, and the next thing you know, everyone's going to be duck and covering. And of course, with the atomic weapons, then you had a ratcheting up of the secrecy inside of government, the power of government, and and so it's just this is why when we look at this new movement coming forward, we should be very, very skeptical because Sophia, I just think it's so likely that it's just coming from the same sources that are producing the gender bending. I mean, if you look at the gender bending, you can trace it right back into the secret societies and the desire to have a society that cannot produce children except by the control of government. I mean, this is the ultimate power. And so, since this is the case, let's use the same skepticism to analyze this new movement to see, well, what is the purpose of it? What is in back of all this in terms of the government wishing to create more power for itself?
Well, again, I wouldn't even use the word government as often as you have,
right.
Because I say powers that be, because the government in 1871 became a corporation itself. So we have government by corporation now, and I spent time interviewing Anita Whitney last week, and that was very, very edifying, that show. So the government and the corporations are on a par. They are all the same kind of players in our lives. And I'm also kind of interested in this concept of universal everything. Now, one of these people in this article is considered a panpsychist, Panpsychist, which means that he thinks consciousness is a universal property of matter. And there's also this universal love, that we should love everybody and everything. And this is part of the gender bending that, Well,
that's actually intellectual bending. I mean, what that's claiming is that there is no distinction that can be made between, the consciousness that a rock has and the consciousness that your child has. And all this does is just creates the kind of intellectual paralysis that enables the government to control people. A real good example of this is this Ken Wapnick guy. He took over the Course in Miracles when Thetford and Schumann sort of gave the project over to him. The Course in Miracles was just one of the, it was a kind of a neo-Christianity that was basically putting absurd ideas into people's head, that Jesus was channeling his thinking into this woman named Schumann, who then it turned out was an employee of MK Ultra. All right, so but both she and Thetford turned out to be working for MK Ultra, and so you can see that this was just a way to try to basically reshape Christianity to make it more effective. Well, Wapnick takes it over, and he then goes on and he talks about the torture at Abu Ghraib, where you had the captured Muslims sexually humiliated, and then the pictures were released. And he took the position that, this is a really good example of what the Course in Miracles teaches us, that you just have to let it go. You can't really hate these people who are doing these things. And he basically just said that Jesus would want there to be, you'd get over the outrage. You wouldn't have any strong reaction to this thing, and you'd just try to go on and be a good person. Well, you can see what the plan is. It's perfectly obvious, is that they're trying to take out of the mind of the citizen the capacity for outrage, right? Because they know what that leads to. So this is it's just a weaponized piece of anthropology that they are using to try to get us to have an inability to have strong emotional reactions to basically evil. You see, so this is this is what we should be looking at. This is what we should be considering when we see this new phenomenon.
I mean, that's from the position of or perspective of the observer of Abu Ghraib, which all of us hardly qualify as that. We read about it in articles. And we were told, I remember, that, the people who perpetrated this, one of them she was working on a chicken farm in Arkansas or somewhere, and they were very bored and very simple people, and they couldn't make good judgments, you would infer from that. And then what about if you are the victim of such a thing?
Exactly.
I mean, I have to say that much of this anal rape is not done just with, human body parts. It's done with broken broom handles and glass bottles, and if you're a victim of this, it affects you for life every time you go to the bathroom, and so this is a way of really harming people psychologically and physically, and it can't be looked at with just kind of a cavalier, oh well, we have to move on.
Exactly. If we don't have outrage, then we are basically accepting it as normalized behavior. I mean, this is the theory in back of the zombie media, is that it normalizes this kind of violence against humans. And so the response that Americas were suggested to have about this kind of torture, is just another part of the rendering of a impotent citizen. I mean, this is really what it's all about, is just to make the citizen completely mentally impotent with no idea about rebellion or outrage.
Yeah, that's a good, I'm writing notes. Mental impotence in the citizenry. And that's really our choice. You get, regardless of what you read and what you're told, you get to protect your own mental competence. Sometimes you have to exert a little more effort,
Exactly. Well,
and it looks like that's what we're up against now. We're having to energize ourselves.
Yeah, we have to energize ourselves, of course, at the same time. Then it's difficult because there's so many toxics in the environment. I mean, I've been doing research into glyphosate Roundup, and I think it really does, in general, make for a impotent citizen. One of the other aspects of it, besides its contribution to damage of the fetus. So, it's basically we're living in a world that has been weaponized against us, and so we have to sort of understand as much as we can about how we have been attacked, who are the individuals who are attacking it, what the motive is, and then we need organization. And, I know you mentioned or came up with an expression that I really liked when we mentioned that information is love at this point. And I think that's a great expression, and one I hope gets into the common vernacular, because that's really true. We have to exchange information, because right now the population is really in a dangerous state of unawareness. And there are, signs of hope coming from, particularly through the internet, where people are understanding that there is weaponized anthropology that's being used against us. They're starting to realize that many people are lifetime actors, that their whole representation of themselves is fake, But they have to keep going further. They have to have the boldness to exchange this information, to give it to people around them, and then to try to connect up with cells of people who have the information. Because right now we are, just completely isolated, and so the situation is such that it's really hard to get the information out there. But information is love, and when you have someone that that really doesn't have just the foundational understanding of some of the things that you're facing, then you have to correct them. You've got to take that step and say, no, you're wrong. And that's why I was thinking, and why shows like the one you're creating are to be praised so much, because really we just need to completely replace the media that we have. Absolutely every single bit of it just has to be replaced. We need to create a brand new media where information is freely exchanged, and weaponized anthropology is detected and exposed. So the shows that you and other people in the truth movement are producing are really the beginning of a complete replacement of the media. We need every single bit of it, every bit of it replaced.
Well, thank you, Joe, but we nonetheless rely on the equivalent of airwaves, this internet grid that isn't owned by us. Now I have to close the window because, of course, there's noise. I have to tell a little information story. My way of putting it was information is the new kind of love. So, I've had a lot of construction going on here for several weeks, and I've had to postpone interviews. The one that you and I scheduled was postponed a couple of times for that reason. And this morning, I heard this horrible noise outside, and I said, oh no. So I decided to go out, find the source of the noise, and ask how long it would continue. And it was a chainsaw being used by a landscaper on one of the nearby walkways to one of the houses. And I said, how long are you going to be doing this? And he said, why, is there a baby sleeping somewhere? I said, no. I said, I'm going to be doing an interview soon that I've had to reschedule, and I just want to know, how long will it go on? He said, oh, I'm done. He said, I'm leaving for the day. I just did a quick, trimming of, anyway, whatever. So I said, all right, thank you. And I started to turn away, and he said, no, I have to ask you a question. I said, what's that? He said, can you explain what your T-shirt says? And I kind of recoiled. I drew back. I said, oh, because it was a T-shirt I just grabbed this morning because I had worn it for a few hours, and it needed to be worn again so it could be put in the wash. And it says, show me the plane hitting the Pentagon. So he just said, what does it mean? I said, I shook my head. I said, well, the plane that hit the Pentagon in 9/11. He said, yeah, what about it? And I said, well, there probably wasn't a plane that hit the Pentagon. He said, well, what hit it? I said, we don't really know. He said, well, what about the buildings? I said, we don't really know that either. And he just stared at me. And I said, if you want to know a little information, I could give you a bit right now just to get you started. And I said, this kind of research is huge. And I started it years and years ago, and I've been at it for many years. So it all begins with a question like the one you asked. I said, I'm amazed you even asked the question. He said, well, I saw the shirt, I read it, and I said, I got to ask her what this means. So we had a very nice talk, and he said he would go and start researching, and he's going to be back next week, and he's going to talk to me some more.
Right, and that was a great interaction. And, one thing I've been mentioning is that people who have that understanding of 911 take their information into the public. Farmers markets, church bazaars, wherever there's a gathering where there's going to be people, is to take the information into the public and try to get more people to just ask that question. What does the statement mean? Because, they haven't destroyed the human brain. They have conditioned it in a negative way. But the brain is still there. And when you start to explain phenomena like the events of 9/11 and link the explanations into reason, they just fall apart. And so it's just having, the tenacity to go out there and get this information into the public domain, and then, trust that, there are still working brains in existence, and that many of them will connect to it. They just aren't at the moment because, frankly, there isn't enough people out there asking that these questions be asked. And, of course, the mainstream media is completely polluted.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he is unusual because I normally don't wear controversial T-shirts, and I don't parade them anymore. I used to, but now I've kind of withdrawn into other subjects. I don't wear my 9/11 T-shirts as much. But he did ask, and he was interested, and he is going to pursue it, and he is awake in terms of his own alertness,
Right.
which is very unusual. Because I could have worn this T-shirt outside into the driveway, and other people could have been there working, and they might not have noticed at all.
They wouldn't have connected very often the T-shirt with anything in history. So that's just the world we live in, but that doesn't, kind of excuse the people who are aware from the responsibility of trying to make the information more public. And again, you're to be praised. I mean, I think, the video that you did was really both extremely valuable and courageous.
Well, thank you. I've moved into some of these other issues now, this transhuman thing.
Sure.
And
yeah, once you can see the government is, using these elements as weapons against culture, then it basically opens up all of these cultural phenomena to the same kind of scrutiny that you applied to the events of 9/11. And once you start, breaking them down in terms of physical possibilities and whether or not the stories hold together, the explanations hold together in terms of reason, then you start to expose basically one element of weaponized anthropology after another. Again, just, and I'm not doing this to, toot my horn, but just if they go to the postflaviana.org website, you'll have some other examples of this phenomena, and in a form I think that's fairly obvious, fairly strong evidence that most people can just, once they see it, can accept. When you start looking at Wasson's development of the psychedelic movement, and Bateson's the letters describing the experiments of controlling inferior people, and Salinger's use of neurolinguistic programming to promote pedophilia. When you start seeing these things, you can see the outline of a general cultural force, some group that has enormous control over our government and media, and is basically trying to control and also to genocide.
now, Joe, I don't know if you're aware of the professor at UCSD, Ricardo Dominguez.
I'm not, no.
So he teaches a class, Visual Arts 104A, Performing the Self. And it's a very popular class. He's been teaching it, I think, 10 years. And the end of this class, there's an assignment, which is a nakedness assignment. And students are required to make a gesture of self-expression while they are naked in front of the class. So the gesture could be a revealing personal statement of some sort, and you're allowed to be naked under like a sheet or something, but you have to, feel that you're in front of the class and you only have a sheet around your naked body. So you have to be a little bit on the edge. But the good news is the room is relatively dark, it's only lit with candles, and the professor is nude too. So, anyway, he says, I was certainly willing to be clothed, but the students all voted that they felt much more comfortable not having anyone else in the class with clothes on during the nude performances. So, when you were talking about the Naked and Afraid show and this idea that, we're being culturally programmed, I think this is part of it, honestly, that you have to present yourself naked to the class. You can skip the assignment. Some Muslim students don't want to do it, and other people do it, all wrapped up. And you can read from your diary, or you can tell some story of something that happened to you. But it's part of what they call performance art and body art. And the department chairman wrote to KPBS, this course made world news because one student's mother heard of this naked assignment. And you can't get an A if you skip the naked assignment. You will not get an A for the semester if you skip it, but you could get a B-. So if you want an A, you absolutely have to do it. And she thought that the whole thing was perverted, and the professor also. So that's when it went worldwide. And so the department chairman, Jordan Crandall, wrote to KPBS in an email, "The ambiguity around the question of nudity and nakedness is intentional. It is intended to be provocative, to raise issues." And the students themselves apparently love it. They know it's part of the class when they sign up, and they think that being vulnerable and naked in this way is part of, growing up. It's part of becoming comfortable with yourself and becoming fully adult.
Well, okay, what about the idea that wearing clothes and modesty are part of becoming an adult?
Yeah, because we let our children run around.
Can't you just as easily argue that perspective?
Right, but that's on a constant basis. And this is a one-time thing, which is part of, a performance.
Right, I'm just pointing out the intellectual structure around the thing is ridiculous. It's just, you might have the case where the professor's just a moron and, this is the best he can do as far as ideas. But on the other hand, I really see tremendous amount of malevolent activity in education. And so I would certainly suspect that if not this individual professor, but just the kind of the educational milieu that operates, that would permit this to come about is destructive. The use of education to destroy the thinking of the citizen is very long-standing, and there's a lot of really good evidence of this. I'll give you just one real quick example, and this is in a kind of a different direction of mental destruction, but I think it's related to the one you mentioned. John Dewey, he created the so-called whole language, which is basically training people not to read phonetically, but to read the image of the word as, is connected to what the word means. Now, he knew that this would destroy the capacity to read well. He actually was aware of this. He wrote letters describing it, but he said, the real problem with society is that you have an inequality of educational skills. And so with this technique, you're going to have the bell curve will be a lot smaller, and most everyone will be kind of a crummy reader. Now, okay, this is, just a really good example of not just of crackpot thinking, but of oligarchic, control. They don't want us to be able to break words down phonetically, even though this was how the language was created. They want us to use this pictographic kind of way of reading, even though if you look at pictographic languages like Chinese and Japanese, they have a core image, say bird, and then slight derivations that will create owl or crow or something like this, so that the brain has an easier time with this memory system. However, if you look at a phonetic language like English, there is no relationship between crow and eagle, right? The only way they can be decoded easily is through phonetics. So the whole thing was nefarious. It was just an attempt to dumb us down. Now you get to this Dominguez character with, let's all get naked. Well, okay, he has an intellectual argument, but I would just go back to the things we were talking about earlier, that he should be scrutinized from the perspective of malevolence. He should be scrutinized from the perspective of, this is part of the archaic revival that we're suffering from. He should be scrutinized from the perspective of, these naked survivor shows are all an attempt to basically prepare us for this post-electric society. Is this guy operating in the same way? Who is this guy? What are his social relations? His family relations? I think all of these things should be brought to bear. And if you started the process, you'd never come to the conclusion like, well, this is a really good use of taxpayer funding for education, right? Well, I mean, even if you see, the problem is that we don't even stand up against these kinds of crackpot ideas, right? Which is the best case, that it's just stupid and it's the guy's a crackpot, because everyone is so intimidated by the forces of cultural Marxism and political correctness that they won't even stand up for, what should just be obvious societal structures. For example, like the idea that in becoming an adult, you learn about modesty and of the kind of a meaning of nakedness that is related to sexuality, and then, of course, that being related to family production. These would just be obvious pillars of a healthy culture, and yet no one stands up against this guy who, under the best case, is a crackpot.
Well, just to remind you, this is not a taxpayer-funded thing, college. It's UCSD, which is private, part of the UC chain. And he's tenured.
It's heavily subsidized by the taxpayer.
Is it? UC?
Absolutely. The UC system is probably 80% funded by taxpayers. Yeah, so it is a public school in that sense, and there should be, there should be some public scrutiny of this. But you see, the problem is that you have the whole system is rotten. If you look at who the regents are and who Governor Brown, who is of course an oligarch, who he appoints to these commissions. I believe Gregory Bateson was one of the regents for a time. Memory may not serve me, but I mean that's the quality that you're dealing with. Is the whole system is just corrupt, and the taxpayer and the citizen needs to stand up against every part of it.
Well, so I'm going to just continue with my line of questioning. So UC, I was told or learned it's private, but you're saying, so I understand who the regents of California, where they emanate from. Right. UC comes actually right out of the Manhattan Project. And it's a very expensive school to attend. It's not cheap. But anyway, so he's tenured, Ricardo Dominguez, and he's very popular. And he did make not just local, but national, and then also international news when this one mother protested about the nature and intention behind such an exercise in this class of his. And still, there was no real investigation, from critically minded reporters. I think people thought it was kind of funny and weird and quirky, and there wasn't outrage that I could see around this article or this series of articles, this breaking news. And this class has been taught for 11 years, and this is the first time it has gotten anyone's attention. So the question is, Joe, what if you were to contact him and interview him? If you're saying we need to make our own media, we have to start following up on things like this. But if he denied you an interview, then where could we go? We could simply opine about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, this isn't some kind of widespread problem. I mean, we're not seeing mandatory nudity in public school grammar schools yet, and so I'm not sure if we want to focus too much on Ricardo, but just my comments are just about my feeling in general about this kind of class, which is I just think it's in the context of the general culture destruction. I can only, since I don't know about the class specifically or anything about Ricardo at all specifically, I can only just put him in a context of my impression in this general sense, and that's my response to it. I'd be happy to chat with him, but I'm not sure I really want to go out of my way to have an interview with him because, I just don't think there's more important things to deal with. But I do think that it is important to point out how, something like this fringe, can be destructive, that there should be, some outrage. And, in that sense, I'd be happy to have a discussion with him in public if he was of a mind.
Well, I think that if you tried that, you'd probably end up getting rebuffed because he's too busy.
Yeah, probably.
Now, it's funny how I stumbled into this. I picked up a Coast News, which is a local newspaper, and sometimes I read it, a little bit of it, just to see what's happening. And I had it in my kitchen, and I was actually going to use it for packing paper. And then I saw this little blurb about this course at UCSD, and I thought, what? And so I went to the internet, looked it up, and I decided to include it in a couple of radio shows as part of a discussion and in a newsletter that I wrote. But here's what really matters. This kind of thing is being included in Common Core. And what I have learned, Common Core textbooks, like the math textbook for fourth graders, you turn the page, you're doing sums and whatnot, and then you turn the page, and now there are diagrams on how to masturbate. And these are included because the federal government has decided, based on advice from experts, that, all subjects need to be mixed up so as not to bore children.
God, that's mercy.
Wow. The idea of monkey see, monkey do begins to play in here, because you get children who are whatever you are in fourth grade, 8 years old, 9 years old, looking at these pictures, and they're very detailed illustrations of different positions, ways that girls can and ways that boys can. And they're going to start wondering and testing and trying. And so a lot of sexual things, overtly sexual things, are part of the Common Core curriculum. And that's not a once a year. We quickly flip to sex education for a week because you kids have to know about this. This is a constant embedding and introduction and description of details and things that most kids would never find out at that age.
Sure, and then of course, once this is established, then you'll have to also bring out the idea of transgenderism for children.
Definitely. Yeah. No, the children are being sexualized in our world, and they are being exposed to ideas that boys can marry boys in the second grade.
Sure. And again, the thing to remember is the argument concerning, an individual's right to, sexual preference is the cover story. That's just an absurdity. The question is, and the question that should be asked is this a cultural weapon? Is there someone producing these ideas and steering our culture into this direction who has a purpose that hasn't been disclosed? And you see, that's the kind of investigation that needs to go on. We need to start looking at, where in the media does this all come from? One good place to start, I think, actually would be, with the Kardashian family. I mean, who are they? Who are they related to? I noticed that I was reading that Madonna now has a DNA cleanup crew. So when she goes out on the road, she has this crew that comes along, make sure there's no physical material that could be used to do DNA sampling on her. Well, this suggests to me that DNA sampling on her should be done. I've been calling, for years that in terms of the political and media class, that we have DNA testing of them, because I would really like to know the actual connections, the ethnicity, the family structures, because in my opinion, we need to get to the bottom of the society that has the levers of power. And this is the first step. We need to know who is related to who. So that would be, just the very beginning would be to start to create these DNA databases so that we could see, well, this person like Miley Cyrus, for example. I mean, she might just be a moron. She might be some kind of mind-controlled, individual, but she might be a relative, right? It could it could be that simple. That it's some kind of family structure that has the idea of power and knows that if you're going to create a slave state, you need to have a high level of sexual activity, and of course, sexual activity that doesn't produce families, right? So it's not just sex, but it's a particular kind of sex. When you look at the ass transplants that the Kardashian has. Basically, it's trying to create a woman that is 100% sex, right? There's no almost, if you see pictures of Kim Kardashian, she doesn't even, I mean, her head is probably 1/100th of the mass of her body, and her ass is like 90%. So she is nothing but a walking sexual concept, not one that would really ever create, a family the oligarchs would have any worry about, but if you start putting her as as a role model, then you're engaging in weaponized anthropology. You're basically just taking young women into a place where sex is not part of family production or of relationship, but it's just an activity that you do to pass the time, and it's fun. And so, when you see the Common Core with, this early introduction of masturbation, and then, of course, they'll start to transition into descriptions of transgenderism. And, of course, the latest one is, this. You pointed this out to me, where we can just go back and forth. There really isn't any set gender. You can be a woman one week and a man the next. So this obviously is going to be a hurdle for production of any kind of nuclear family. And I think it's actually simply weaponized anthropology. It's just trying to take the mind of the citizen into a place from which they're easy to get rid of. And of course, they cannot possibly rebel against any of these anthropologic forces that are being used to shape them.
Yeah, I was listening to what you were saying and just thinking, it's very hard to trace and track all the different angles that these phenomena around us are creating, and the different kinds of influences they're having on us. For instance, the Kardashians are serially marrying black basketball players and rappers, although they themselves are Armenian and their mother is, European American. Father Bob was O.J. Simpson's personal friend and lead defense lawyer. He's dead now, Bob Kardashian. And the Kardashian girls, they have stores called Dash New York, Dash Miami, and they sell fashions of one kind. I hope they're big enough to fit butts, because they were in a ski shop grumbling in Big Sky, Montana, because they couldn't find ski suits to fit their butts. So, but they themselves are out there flogging, marketing teeth whitening products, fake tanning, weight loss, jewelry, skincare lines. So they're very much into the cosmetic enhancement of self.
Well, they're very powerful in terms of cultural direction.
Yeah.
They have influence.
Well, they do now, because they all have gargantuan mansions in Calabasas with like marble floors and these giant closets that are just brimming with shoes and clothes. They have shoes in all different colors, the same style in like 6 different colors. They buy it. And they're asked to be spokespeople for other products and other events, and they're constantly traveling everywhere and appearing, and of course everywhere they appear is an ode to Bruce Jenner, because now they're associated with that. In fact, there's a funny little anecdote. A friend told me the other day, opening day at the Del Mar racetrack was, I think, last Thursday. So she told me that her daughter had been invited by another friend of the daughters and I guess their parents to attend opening day, which is always a big deal. People wear these huge hats. Women wear these giant, beautiful, expensive hats and clothes. And so they were going to have box seats front, of the grandstand. And at the very last minute, they were denied their box because guess who took it? Caitlyn Jenner and the Kardashians.
Right. Well, being the people that own the racetrack are just trying to find a way to promote their business, I presume, and so they're, just giving celebrities the nod. But this, is actually a reflection of something that's really quite sinister, which is that the media is such a narrow funnel, right? I mean, it's just, it's how we find out about ourselves. It's how we get the direction of where we need to head in terms of what's hip. Young people are influenced by it. And it's so narrow and so completely controlled. You have such a few number of media outlets, and I think all of them are basically in league with the society that organizes the government. And so, basically everything in the media is weaponized anthropology, virtually every single thing. I've been saying, in my own life, I just try to stay away from the media. I don't watch it. I have other ways of getting information through the internet, and I'm interested in developing a completely alternative media, because this one, the one that we have, the one that makes people even aware of a family as destructive as the Kardashians, is controlled by people that have malevolent intent for the vast majority of the people who experience their media.
Well, Joe, in my experience of my friends who are mainstream, who are not awake, they're very confused by all the hubbub around the Kardashians and Bruce Jenner. They see the Kardashians as the world's most stupid, uninteresting, fake, gross family, yet they just don't understand why they're always on TV and everybody makes a big fuss over them. My point in bringing up that racetrack story was, I would love to get a glimpse of Caitlyn Jenner. I really want to see what happened. How big is this person, in terms of stature, and what are the proportions, and what's the energy that she exudes. So I wish I had gone to opening day, but I didn't. And it would, to me, they were in town. I could have seen them, only because I'd like to do a quick study. Sure. Not because I'm celebrity struck, I
was just going to mention something. When your friends are perplexed as to why the Kardashians are even exposed at all inside the media, it's a shame that they don't have the same curiosity that the individual who asked you about your T-shirt did. Because when that person wanted to know further about, what information was in back of this idea, his brain was really working well at that point. When people look at the Kardashians and are perplexed, but then don't go to the next step and ask the question as to why, what's in back of it, this is a kind of, emotional defeatism that's been programmed into them. They really shouldn't do that. They should demand to know. Why in the hell are the Kardashians presented to the public? Think about all of the really culturally destructive shows. Look at Jersey Shore, where you had a group of youthful degenerates living together and being glamorized, and they would follow them basically into the bars where the women would invariably get in fistfights. Why is that something that even should be on the media? And then, of course, people would say, well, it's what the public wants. Well, this is absurd.
Right. Well, it's never what the
It's
public
not what the
wants.
public wants. It's what the oligarchs want to condition us with. So that's that was when you mentioned that it's sad that the people who are confused about that don't take the next step and try to get to the bottom of it.
Well, Joe, I think so much of it has to do with how your brain is made and how it has been honed by you for, decades. Because I don't know this person at all who asked me about my T-shirt. I just saw him for the first time today. But he was even sweaty. He was pouring sweat. It's very warm out, and he had all kinds of, landscaping debris around him and a big can of bush bits that he had sawed off, and so he wasn't in a state of repose where he could start thinking and contemplating. He wasn't in a relaxed kind of state, and in spite of all that, he had the wherewithal to stop me before I turned around and walked off and asked me. And yet the people I'm talking about they're not chopping up bushes and working, they're retired or they're whatever. They're people of more leisure, and yet they don't have a curiosity.
Well, just one thing that should be done is to create a vocabulary for people to use to analyze the media with, and one I think is really valuable is lifetime actor. We need to expose a few lifetime actors, just completely expose them. People like Wasson and Ken Kesey and individuals in the Grateful Dead. I mean, you need to really to just absolutely make it clear that there is a class of people whose whole representation of personality is just done to create cultural destruction. And once that gets out, once the people are aware of lifetime actors, then they'll always go to the next question of, well, is this something that's being done to weaken me? I don't know if the Kardashians are lifetime actors. I mean, they could just be morons, but certainly in back of them, certainly the things that are promoting them, the groups that brought them to the public, they knew that this was going to be something that was very destructive. I really, for example, like with Miley Cyrus, she had as a alter ego when she was doing Hannah Montana as a child. She had this alter ego as a rock star. And I really don't think that this could be circumstantial. I think that with Miley Cyrus, you had someone that was basically programmed. I mean, the media image of her was programmed to create the exact right identification. The process of having the young girls who are watching the show would identify. They would essentially give some of their self to. They would identify with the character Hannah Montana and the fantasies that she had about her future being this alter ego as a music star. Because then once the identification has been created, has been fused into the minds of all of these millions of young girls who are watching the show, then when Cyrus comes forward in her next iteration as the Whore of Babylon, basically, now you have the maximum damage that you can do to these young women who have been subjected to the process by which they are identifying with the individual, with Miley Cyrus, and then most damaged by the next step in the process, where when she comes forward as the Whore of Babylon, that it's someone that you really want to be like, that's someone that you trust, someone that you have this relationship with. So that's how I would look at Miley. And then in terms of the Kardashians, I don't know. It may have been the case that the oligarchs just found them and just said, look, this family is simply so culturally polluted that it's just perfect to bring it into the public. I would as another example, like the individuals who were in the Jersey Shore, I don't think they were employees of the oligarchs per se. I think they were just selected for, being, having substance abuse issues and stupidity. And that was the image that they wanted to give to young people. That was the influence they wanted to have, into the people they're watching it.
Well, Joe, I would bring up here that the oligarchs or government or the hidden society powers that be, they need models to demonstrate the trends that they're interested in cultivating in the society at large and having people follow. So the Kardashians may have been uniquely suited to this because their father was an influential Hollywood LA lawyer, and they are multicultural themselves. This is the whole thing. They are a multicultural success story in the eyes of the public at large, intent on cosmetically augmenting themselves, and their interchanges going on at home, domestic whatever activities are extremely boring. But they do get into the odd problem, like they'll need a surgery or they'll be having babies or something. So this is watched in the reality context in these shows. Now, the inclusion of Bruce Jenner in the Kardashian family model, to me, is very interesting because Bruce Jenner was not a standout athlete in the old days. He had an injury in high school or college, and while he was a trackster, but then he took to the decathlon because I think that he was able to, do better at multiple things rather than stress his body out in whatever fallibility he had going as a consequence of the injury. So he may have been helped to become an Olympian with anabolic steroids. I don't know. Anything is possible because in the construction of a hero, if you are chosen and it is thought that you are the right one, they can do all kinds of things. So he was taking hormones, female hormones, because there's always a preparatory stage during which men who are contemplating gender change must be on hormones. And he was doing this in the 80s. He had his rhinoplasty, his thinning of the nose back then. He had some work done on his jaw. And when he married into the Kardashian family, I noticed, because I did catch the Kardashians a few years ago on TV, and I didn't know what to make of them at that time, but I did notice that when Bruce Jenner walked in and out of the room on the set and, played stepdad, that he didn't seem to be like the Bruce Jenner I remembered from the 70s, the Olympian. He seemed a lot less robust, and I attributed it to old age. His face had changed, but I really wasn't thinking critically enough at that time. And then, of course, he announced this whole gender change, and he claims publicly that he did all this alone. He had to wrestle with the loneliness of this confusion that he carried. He didn't even tell his wife. And he had his surgeries, but he has not had the gender reassignment surgery, which is very interesting, and I doubt that a lot of these men really will go through with it. It was done on the early transgender people. There's the penectomy and the orchiectomy. So you have your testicles taken off and your penis, and then you have the vaginoplasty and you have the breast put on. But there can be any number of these surgeries to get you exactly contoured the way you want. But here's the thing, Joe. This just dawned on me, and it's my crazy mind working overtime. A trans man who has his penis removed and his testicles and has a vagina put in is not going to be able to derive sexual pleasure anymore, because those are the tissues that he's lost now. So my guess is that these gender reassignment surgeries are not going to be popular and not going to take place, and you're going to end up with exactly this two-spirited androgynous type done surgically and hormonally called the two-spirited human being, the chick with a dick. This is going to be the model in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to stop the productions of families that the oligarchs don't want to have exist. I frankly, just doubt the whole Bruce Jenner story tip to stern. I don't believe it. I think and I don't know Bruce, don't get invited to the Kardashian parties, so I can only understand them analytically. But my attempts to just make sense of it indicates that there is simply no chance, statistically, it's just impossible, that the family that was the most cultural polluting family, the most, the one that was really producing the biggest damage to the psychic that would produce sort of nuclear families, would also throw off a transgender. I just don't buy it. I think that more than likely Jenner was somehow, he's somehow being controlled, and that this is just completely artificial. I think the statistics on this are, from what I've read, are just so, unusual. The idea that you'd have transgenderism is just a very, very rare kind of, phenomena, and I just don't think it would come out of this family. I think it's just really implausible, and I would, for me to believe it, I would have to talk to Bruce and be able to get him to submit to some kind of real analytic scrutiny. Now, you talk about interviewing Dominguez, I'm not that interested in having that conversation, but if Bruce will talk to me publicly, I'd be happy to do that. Maybe you and I can both ask questions of him if she happens to be in the neighborhood.
You should have come to the races. But listen, so your wish is going to be granted on Sunday the 26th. The series dedicated to Bruce Jenner is going to begin on television. And it's called, I think, I Am Kate. So it'll be on at 8 on Sundays on the ETV channel and premiering this Sunday. But I think, just to clarify, you're saying that you don't think that Bruce Jenner is organically chose to be a female. That
right.
This was.
I think he either is somehow in on the deal, in which case I'd have to try to find out what sort of family background he has, or he has been basically created. Now, I mean, I would have to just speculate wildly, but I can imagine if they really wanted to produce this phenomenon in Bruce, they could give him the right kind of psychiatric treatment, which means hooking him up with the right psychologist who would basically be able to bend his mind in the right direction, and at the same time, without his knowledge, just give him hormones that would produce the right effect, and then subtly move him into this position. I mean, this is just speculation, but as far as there being just an organic occurrence of a transgender individual inside the Kardashians, man, it just doesn't smell right to me.
Yeah, it is a lot going on in one pot. But just let me throw another curveball at you. Bruce Jenner did graduate from Newtown High School. Yeah,
you told me this. This is just very, very bizarre. You're the suspicion that I have advocated citizens maintain toward the cultural forces, that we're experiencing. I think, would hope it exists inside of me, and to the extent it does, it's just saying, well, this is obviously fake. I mean, this is just clearly fake. I mean, this just shouldn't be where this individual comes from, and so you don't know, and absent some real investigative reporting miracle, we're never going to know, but we need to be able to question it. We need to be able to understand the uncertainty and the improbability of it, because these are ways that we can defend ourselves from the influence. Because remember, this stuff is supposed to be influencing us on an unconscious level. They are attacking the subconscious with this kind of media presentation. And so we need to always have that critical skepticism about these events, and see them as always as potentially being done to hurt us. because then we keep our balance. We don't let these forces influence us, and then we just go, well, I guess you subconsciously acquiesce to this being a normal reality. I mean, it isn't. It isn't normal, and it's part of something that's very nefarious.
Well, it brings us back to our topic that we started on, the weaponization of biology for control and alteration. And if somebody as influential as Bruce Jenner, and remember, he was influential in the 1970s as the Olympian, the gold medalist, and then he was flying off the cereal boxes, as I like to put it. People are joking and saying he will next be on the Fruit Loops cereal box.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of star quality, athletic male star quality in the past. And now Superman effectively chose to become a lady. And this is possibly going to influence the minds of American youth who, as I've mentioned in other radio programs that I've done, have been born out of a womb that is heavily dominated by estrogenic chemicals, plastics, and may have altered biology in that regard, not complete male development, that is. And then they grow up in a society where they use so much plastic and so many products that have the very same estrogen mimickers in them that it's possible after 20 or 30 years of this kind of exposure, they too would opt to switch their gender and seek the surgeries and the hormone treatments. Because effectively, the matrix we're in chemically is hormone preparation for men. It's female hormone treatment.
Exactly. And you're exactly right. And this is my suspicion as well, that what they're doing is they have created the individuals that will now embrace the transgender rainbow culture, right? So on one side, they have the toxicity that keeps males from fully forming, and then on the other side, they have this cultural attack that then suggests that, well, you really should be, moving toward your feminine self, and and so that your sexual preference is just that's not relevant. Whatever you want, whatever gender you want to be this week is not relevant. I mean, you can actually see if you just stand back for a second the outline of a program, because you had the rainbow flag being hoisted by the media, Obama, with all this Facebook thing with the rainbow flag becoming such a popular event. You had the Supreme Court issuing the same-sex marriage ruling, right? So no longer can it be prohibited by states. And then you had Bruce Jenner, right? All within like 30 days. I mean, this just strikes me as a program. And this is basically their ratcheting up the culture, which they want to embrace males that are don't have the biological drive of normal men, so that they won't feel out of place. Basically, I mean so this is again, this is an area that we need science here. I mean, you have this incredible decline in the sperm count in European males over the last 50 years. You have this real problem, in my opinion, of the plastic estrogen mimicry that is now inside the bodies of so many men. And then you have the cultural embrace of transgender and transsexual individuals. This is basically just an attempt to feminize, a group that the oligarchs doesn't like. And in doing so, they take away the capacity to replicate this group. It can't really produce families any longer. I mean, you look at all of the areas of toxicity, and there is some, like, I'll give you another example, is autism. A scientist that I found to be very credible was talking about the relationship between glyphosate, this Roundup Ready material that's in all of the food now, and autism. And she was predicting that by 2050, half of the children born would be autistic. Well, if at the same time you couple, a large fraction of the males are no longer functioning as males, well, you can see where we're headed. It's just a slow motion genocide that chemicals and culture are being used to produce. So, there it is. We can see this analytically. We can see these patterns, and we can understand, certain things statistically. We really need science to step forward and provide us with, more of the answers. We need more science in terms of the effects of the estrogen mimicry. We need more science in terms of the DNA of the oligarch class. And we need more investigative reporting of the motivations and kind of nefarious coordinations of the people that own the media. I mean, these things all have to happen, and they have to happen damn quick.
Well, yeah, and here I'm going to sound like a car. I'm going to go, but Joe, if you call for more science, science is very controlled now by the government, okay?
Sure.
And in order to become a scientist, you have to train at a scientific facility, which would be a university, or you have to teach yourself entirely. And in order to create a laboratory in which you can do research, you're going to be extremely limited as a single person, a single individual. You're going to need microscopes and all kinds of equipment. So when you call for this science, who are you calling to?
There have been examples over the last 10 years of what I would call independent science.
And they're murdered.
From time to time. But you know something? I'm just saying that we have to do it. We have to find the courage, and the individual scientists, hopefully some of them are listening to the show. Hopefully this show will be an inspiration for them to take the risk. I was very influenced by a lecture by Dr. Terry Vrain concerning glyphosate, and he referenced many other scientists and studies that have somehow gotten through the matrix of control over science. And I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think the PhD system, in academia and generally in science is very, very controlled by the oligarchs. But nevertheless, we have to do it. The scientists who have the curiosity about their reality, that the individual who asked you the question concerning your T-shirt, those scientists need to go forward and to do the research to find out about the effects of glyphosate, the effects of the plastic mimicry of estrogen, and those who are reporters, people who are working on stories, they should start looking at the control of the media, the relation, and to see how these cultural forces are created and put into these different media outlets. That's what we need to do now. Is it easy? Absolutely not. And is there a danger? Yes, there is. But so what? We have to do it. So we just have to find the courage and the strength to do it.
Okay, well, you have two assignments. You've got to interview Ricardo Dominguez at UCSD and Bruce Jenner.
Well, I'd be happy to do it. In other words, I would, if they would agree, I would do the interviews.
Yeah, but you're going to have to figure out a way to get in touch. Ricardo Dominguez is
the problem is with that is that it's asking me to basically do something which I have no control over. In other words, if they won't agree to the interview, then I don't really have any way to force them to do it.
Right. But let me make a suggestion.
Sure.
You have a very strong position because your Caesar's Messiah work is so controversial. It, in some ways, aligns with what you call the government's desire to crush religion, right?
Sure.
So right there, you have a calling card. And if you explain to Ricardo Dominguez that this is who you were, he might actually say, wow, yeah, interview me.
Well, give it a shot. I would really like to interview Jenner. I actually have a lot. I mean, my mind has many more questions that I think would be interesting to have him try to answer. I'm afraid that Dominguez might just be a crackpot. He might be used by the oligarchs, but I mean, I can imagine him being completely sincere and absolutely believing in the value of what he would call performance art. And then you would get into these, just weird discussions about the nature of performance art and the nature of human liberation and different things that are, kind of far afield. I really want to ask Bruce specifically about hormone treatments.
Okay, but let me continue with my suggestion here.
Sure.
You're going to build on these two interviews, because Dominguez may be a lot easier to get, and you can ask him all about performance art. And his course, remember, is called Performing the Self. And that is exactly the core philosophy of transgender people. Their self was trapped in the wrong body, and in seeking this gender reassignment, this gender remaking, they are performing the self. So then you go to Bruce Jenner, by way of his agent or something, go wander around Calabasas, around the Kardashians' house, and you're bound to see him, and ask, say, I interviewed so-and-so, this professor, on performing the self. This is what you're doing. I'm the maker of Caesar's Messiah, etc., etc. Hey, it'll fit.
Well, I'll tell you, let me think about it. These are it's a great idea. It's just, I also have a lot of things on the plate, and it's hard to find the time to do all the stuff I want to do. But let me think about it, and we'll, we talk all the time, so I'm open to it. Let me think about it, and we'll talk about it later this week.
We will,
okay.
For sure. And this is how I try to creatively figure out the strategy.
Right, and as you know, I'm a huge fan of you and of your approach, and so I'm going to, let me think about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the show. We've been on almost 2 hours, and I hope that listeners have enjoyed this. It's gone in many directions. But, Joe, you are never afraid of a subject, so I really am grateful to you for this very, interesting and fleshed out conversation that we've had.
It was my pleasure, Sophia. It's always a pleasure to discuss subjects with you. And, my feeling is just try to tell the honest reality that you experience. So far I've been able to do it, and I'm still standing. So I intend to continue to do it, and it's just a pleasure to be able to come on your show and get a chance to talk about these things.
Well, thank you, and we'll do it again.
Okay, great.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Sophia.